Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to your morning briefing here for Thursday, the 21st of August, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Thank you for spending your morning with us. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway. Robert, good morning. Starting with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, is being slashed. Seems important. What's the latest?
Good morning, Mike. So yesterday, Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, announced plans to shrink the Office of the Director of National Intelligence by 40% by the end of this year. And she said this is going to save $700 million per year by basically removing redundant personnel and activities that she said are basically copying or recopying work done by the agencies that the ODNI oversees, and that they're going to invest in areas specifically that support President Trump's national intelligence priorities and expose politicization and weaponization of intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is interesting. It's not uncommon for in the world of intelligence analysis to take a slide produced by some other analyst or some other agency or some other branch or department, wherever you work, and remove their logo, put your logo on it, and now it's yours. Did they say exactly what kind of duplication they're trying to remove exactly, Robert?
No, she just said that apparently almost half of the ODNI is basically replicating the same work as all these other agencies. She didn't mention any specific topics or anything that they are redundant on.
Okay, interesting. All right, let's move on here to the latest from the Fed. This is interesting. So there's been a lot of talk about whether Fed Chair Jay Powell is going to be replaced. Apparently, they're going to start interviewing a new Fed chair after Labor Day. That's according to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. So Powell's on his way out in May. However, some Fed board members and governors may be out before then.
Well, we've already seen one Fed governor resign, and Trump is actually putting up his economic advisor Stephen Mirren for that Fed seat, at least temporarily. But now the Trump administration is putting pressure on Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, and Trump called on her to resign yesterday. And this is after it came out from the Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte that Cook allegedly committed mortgage fraud, I believe in at least Georgia and one other state. And if Trump's pressure campaign does succeed in pushing out Cook, then this would be the fourth out of 7 Federal Reserve governors who are Trump appointees, because he had 2 during his first term.
Mm-hmm. That sure seems like a good way to get Fed policy aligned with President Trump's own national economic policies and financial and monetary policies as well. So basically, we're not just looking at a replacement of here's the thing. A lot of people talk about, and Jay Powell gets a lot of blame for not cutting interest rates, but or the federal funds rate, which is what interest rates are based on. However, or partially based on. However, it's not Jerome Powell's call. This is they vote on it. So this is not just eventually replacing Jay Powell with someone who's more amenable to the Trump agenda. This is basically an entire changing of the guard at the Fed. I mean, it looks like here. All right. And with that, let's move on. New York. So there's a number of states that already allow non-citizens to become law enforcement officers and carry firearms. New York may be the latest.
Yeah, so these are 2 bills, one in the New York State Assembly and one in the New York State Senate that were introduced earlier this year, and these are Assembly Bill A7248 and Senate Bill S4498, and these would remove the citizenship requirement for police officers and firefighters in the state of New York. They're right now they're still in committee and they've not been scheduled for a floor vote yet, but New York would be the latest of at least 12 states that allow non-citizen police. Just since 2022, Illinois, California, Colorado, and Washington, D.C. have passed similar laws that allow non-citizens to become police officers. Usually this means someone who is a lawful permanent resident, so they have a green card or certain types of visas, like H-1B visas are not allowed, usually under these laws. And part of that is because under federal law, H-1B visa holders cannot possess firearms. I think the bottom line up front on looking at this change over the last couple of years, I think there's a significant push at the state level to allow non-citizens to become police officers. And this goes back to, I think last year we covered that Illinois court decision on illegal immigrants having Second Amendment rights that was just recently overturned in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. I think there's been a push to get more, especially some of these states, for two reasons. One, to address a post 2020 recruiting crisis for police in some of these states. And in some of the blue states, I think it's basically political patronage, a mixture of political patronage and a desire for implementing a more politically loyal law enforcement arm in some of these blue states that have passed these laws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember we had that debate, and it was somewhat spirited in the comments because a lot of people said, "Oh, the Second Amendment comes from God." Of course, rights do. However, if we had, let's just say there were a million Chinese military-age males in the United States and illegally, and they also had the right to own firearms, that seems like a recipe for disaster. So some of this stuff, you can just take it into logical conclusions here and say, yeah, that's probably a really bad idea. All right, let's move on to Portland. And let's just say this. Last summer, I noticed in Portland, Seattle, and a handful of other cities, I was reading this article about some new tactics that they adopted. And I was reading through it, and I said, you know what? This sounds a lot like counterinsurgency. And that's effectively what it is. Some of these city law enforcement agencies have adopted essentially counterinsurgent tactics against Antifa and these far left groups. So let's go ahead and actually, I think the Seattle City Council actually allowed the Seattle cops to use less lethal munitions like the pepper spray balls and whatever against the Antifa rioters. So big changes for these for these police departments in these cities. But what's the latest from Portland here, Robert?
So this is a Multnomah County judge ruling on a lawsuit from a citizen living near the Portland, Oregon ICE detention facility, and they were suing, or they were basically suing the Portland police because they said they're not enforcing noise ordinances during this ongoing protest outside of the ICE detention facility. And the judge said that they actually do not have to do that, which I thought was an interesting decision because that effectively means that this anti-ICE protest is basically legally allowed to break local ordinances in effect. And I think this is interesting because the local and state courts are in some of these states a significant part of the far left and progressive support network. And I'm reminded of a few months ago, there was a leaked report from the Montana Democratic Party. They called the report, the Democrats themselves called it tangible damages. And basically it outlined a strategic necessity of leveraging the courts for policy priorities and political priorities when they're out of power, which I think in this case, this is one aspect of this that while this judge is probably not formally connected to any anti-ICE protester group, they are serving as a support network for that anti-ICE ongoing protest.
Certainly. But hasn't there always been some level of officer discretion? Like an officer maybe doesn't have to make an arrest. He could write you a ticket or choose to do nothing. I mean, isn't there some level of that already?
Generally, yeah. And that's what the judge said was that, yeah, there exists this discretion. But as far as I understand, if this was not an anti-ICE protest, there probably would be some enforcement of the noise ordinances, and this has been ongoing since basically the beginning of the year. I think especially when those initial anti-ICE protests started out on when Trump surged National Guard forces and ICE into California.
Yes, for several months now in Portland. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on to our global sit rep items, starting with this North Korea, a nuclear destroyer. Is this what this is?
Jerry? Nuclear armed destroyer. Just
okay.
Yep. Kind of running out of characters there, though. So North Korean leader Kim Jong-un told his state news agency that the first nuclear armed destroyer is on track to conduct operational capability tests in October. North Korea actually currently has 2 of the Choicheon class destroyers in the water and a third under construction, which actually puts them ahead of schedule. So they're rapidly building up a destroyer force that they intend to have nuclear launch capabilities. Now, we previously reported on this on the 1st of May, and Kim intends to build one destroyer each year, but here we're at almost 3. He's doing quite well for building a navy. As he has 2 in the water, like I said, he's ahead of schedule, even though they're not all operational yet.
Okay. And just so I understand this, when you look at the U.S. nuclear triad, there's sea, air, and land-based nuclear launch vehicles. Typically, when we're talking about sea launch, we're talking about from submarines, correct? But you're talking about a destroyer launching like a nuclear missile or something like that. What does that look like, actually?
It looks like a program we used to have, actually. Before the INF treaty went into effect, we had just publicly, hey, there were some missiles that were technically nuclear capable. So all of the capability remains, but we say that we don't put them on ships. So what that would look like is basically imagine not saying that this is what would happen, but imagine a Tomahawk with a nuclear tip, and basically you're just launching a tactical nuke. You're not launching city-ending nuke.
So no ICBMs. It's like a cruise missile.
Yeah. But still, you are wiping out an area with a nuclear weapon.
Sure, of course. And does North Korea, do they have the hypersonic cruise missile yet?
I have not seen that. Actually, that's a good distinction. So since they're working much more with the Russians, they would probably actually obtain a true hypersonic missile rather than a hypersonic glide vehicle like what the Chinese have. Mm-hmm. So that is a significant threat. The biggest threat here, by the way, is that they would actually consistently be able to reach the U.S. homeland, because this would allow them to push their launch platform out. They don't have to launch from Korea itself, and it allows them to establish a blue water navy.
So they can just sit somewhere out in the Pacific, in the deep blue ocean. Okay. All right, let's move on here to earlier this week. You talked about, or maybe Robert talked about, the United States actually potentially obtaining an equity stake in Intel. Looks like maybe they're looking to do the same for Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC.
Yeah, it's actually all part of the same maneuver. So this is coming from anonymous White House officials familiar with the CHIPS Act funding distribution, which is why the U.S. is talking about investing in Intel. But this would affect TSMC, potentially Samsung, and other producing companies. And the Taiwanese Minister of Economic Affairs said yesterday that, they are looking into this, and pending an assessment of follow-on effects, probably going to approve it.
Mm-hmm. State capitalism, economic statecraft. Get used to it. We're on the cusp, the very, very beginning edge of this. All right. And then, Jared, I'm just going to let you take it away, starting with these, whatever going on with these embassies in Taiwan.
Sounds good. So actually, this is pretty related. The U.S. office in Taiwan and the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office here in the United States, both those are unofficial embassies. We're not allowed to have official relations, but we kind of do. They signed their first ever memorandum of understanding earlier this week on the 18th. This MOU is to combat international drug trafficking. The subject is important, but not as important as the actual act itself. This is an official diplomacy carried out by semi-official government entities. This is a next step in recognizing Taiwan's independence. Mm-hmm. All right. And coming over to Japan, the Japanese Defense Ministry plans to request 8.8 trillion yen, which is just shy of $60 billion, to counter China's military presence around the southern islands. And they intend to do this by deploying an unmanned aircraft and really unmanned vehicle defense network across those islands that they're calling the SHIELD program. This is going to require them to start mass producing air, land, and seaborne drones in order to defend against invasion. So we're going to see a lot more of that coming out of Japan, and probably see some purchases from the United States on those drones. Then moving over to Russia. So we've covered the Ukraine peace talks. They're back in the news. President Trump's moving quite along. But the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said President Putin is prepared to meet Zelensky, but with the understanding that all issues that require consideration at the highest level will be worked out. Now, a lot of those are security issues, as you'd expect, but one of those stood out in particular is that they want clarified legitimacy of Zelensky due to the fact that he suspended elections because he is at war. And Russia's primary concern here, at least the stated concern, is that any follow-on presidency would nullify the peace deal because, Zelensky never held an election. He wasn't a legitimate president. We're going back to war. Russia, at the end of the day, wants to maintain a peace that they achieve.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, also, lots still more to come on that. So thanks for that, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on here to our protests coming up for today, this afternoon, this evening. 62. So I asked Jared and Andrew to crunch the numbers, and over the past few months, the number of protests throughout the week is actually declining, and volume almost certainly is declining much steeper than that as well. So, which is important because one of the major conclusions I've come across over the past couple of months is actually this national protest movement has probably plateaued. Jared, next slide. Coming up next weekend is the National Labor Day of Action. As of this morning, they've surpassed about 600 events. And this is coming up on Monday, the 1st of September, Labor Day. So roughly 10 days out, we're about half of what we saw for the No Kings National Day of Action. They had, I think, probably like 1,500 protests scheduled across the country. I would be extremely surprised if they surpass that. But one thing I'm looking for is whether they will achieve a higher level of turnout. Because what I'm seeing is this national protest movement, and this is from groups like Indivisible, which kind of run, several different campaigns. They had the No Kings, they had the Hands Off. Those were the two national days of action where I think they probably passed 3 million nationally, which is about 25% of the 12 million that they say they need to actually induce a collapse of the Trump regime, or they say the Trump regime or the Trump administration. And then there is the Mayday Strong, a handful of other ones. The Tesla takedown was another one. They've been doing these national mobilization, and actually we are seeing a decline in that. This is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, I do not look at that as necessarily a sign of weakness. Organizers have addressed this. One reason why they're concerned about running too many of these national days of action because people will get burned out and they'll lose the sense of urgency. And it's like, oh, next month, okay, another national protest, got to go out all day. And so they have said that this movement doesn't necessarily need to grow month over month, like they don't need to achieve greater turnout month over month, but they do have to keep expanding their mobilization capacity. And that means expanding their networks. Last month, I told you all they launched this 1 million strong campaign, and what they wanted to do is train 1 million new activists and get those 1 million people. They're far short of 1 million people, I think. But what they wanted to do is get 1 million activists to hold meetings in their homes or at a community center, invite a bunch of people out, friends, family, whoever might want to join this protest movement, and basically induct them or give them an education, meaning kind of indoctrination, but indoctrinating them into this concept of strategic non-cooperation, which is the fundamental strategy of a color revolution. So that first meeting was about some training and education, familiarizing these new members with this concept. And then the second meeting was for them to go out and actually plan some strategic non-cooperation event or plan a protest or some form of direct action or some demonstration. So a lot of these are going to be kind of, silly or piddly. Like there was was it in Columbus, Ohio or something? You had a chain of people holding hands for 8 miles or something like that. That's the kind of stuff. And again, this is designed to gain media traction, to gain media coverage, because when you look at how you disseminate a message, okay, you have these different channels, distribution channels. And what they need to do is they need to get their message out through mass media. So this is going to be like your local CBS or NBC affiliate sending a reporter down to shoot some live reporting from this protest. And that just reaches more people. So they're trying to expand the ways that they get their message out. this is very important. We're in the very first phase of this. I've been telling y'all, look, through 2028, this is what we're looking at: protest, and then moving to resistance, and then potentially, depending on how the 28 election goes, maybe moving into outright abject color revolution type stuff. At a minimum, we're going to see resistance ramp up. This is exactly what these meetings are for. Point being, we're kind of in a lull right now. I don't expect a whole lot. Moving into next year, I think it's going to be a lot more disruptive as more of these groups get trained up and probably actually start an organized resistance campaign in earnest. And then beyond the midterms, I know this is so far out, it just seems like noise. But 27 and 28, I'm not sure we're going to reach the intensity of 2020, but it's going to be quite disruptive and boisterous here, especially if the Trump administration continues on. And actually, with these 10,000 new ICE agents, they're going to be ramping up operations. That's just a lot of surface area for a lot more organized resistance. So next year, we will almost certainly see an uptick. Robert, have you seen when ICE operations may actually ramp up? How long is it going to take for them to add and train and get out on the streets these new 10,000 ICE agents?
Well, the actual new funding doesn't go in effect until January. They did say they've got, last I saw, DHS is claiming 100,000 applicants for ICE since they made that initial announcement, though. But it's if I remember correctly, the latest posting for ICE for all the different ICE agent jobs closes on the 29th. So probably not going to start seeing that really take effect until the end of the year.
Okay. Well, another reason to expect at some point next year, organized resistance will probably begin in earnest. So this is going to be stuff like civil disobedience and sit-ins and protests maybe surrounding, we have seen in like Los Angeles and some of these other cities, we have seen groups of people come out to protest ICE while they are trying to round up illegal immigrants, detain them for deportation. All right. Thanks for that update, Robert. And so the bottom line here is get ready for, I noticed in the comments, people are saying, blue-haired Karens. Yeah, predominantly. That's what the Labor Day, National Day of Action is going to be. Blue-haired Karens. But point being, we are seeing a plateau and probably a decrease in overall number of events and also overall turnout. That's not to say that we can't go through periods of escalation. I'm sure we will. Probably just not going to happen next weekend. With that, let's go ahead and move on to today's gerrymander watch. So the Texas House passed the mid-decade redistricting plan that now goes to the Senate and then it's going to almost certainly will sail through. So that's what we're looking at. And then was it last night, California Governor Gavin Newsom came out and said, all right, well, let's dance. So California has already been heading down this path, but are they any closer?
So they're set to vote today, actually, on this new map. As you can see on the screen, the old map, or the previous map that they used in the 2024 election, and the map they are planning to use next year. Right now, it's set for a vote in both the state assembly and the state senate, and they're also set to vote on two other bills. One that's going to direct the Secretary of State to call a special election in November, and then another constitutional amendment that will allow them to legally use this new map if it does pass that November vote.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, please continue.
And then yesterday, the California Supreme Court also rejected California Republicans' emergency petition, and they were trying to get a pause on this redistricting effort in the state legislature. They didn't provide an explanation for the denial, and California Republicans said they're going to continue challenging this new map in the courts. So I expect more lawsuits between now and November 4th, when that special election is supposed to be scheduled for. And then former President Barack Obama made a statement yesterday supporting California Democrats' mid-decade redistricting effort. And he specifically said that Democrats need to provide an equally aggressive effort in response to Texas Republicans' mid-decade redistricting. And he said, quote, "We cannot unilaterally allow one of the major parties to rig the game." So I think there's two things going on here. One, he's helping further set this rhetorical framework that Democrats are retaliating against Republicans for this mid-decade redistricting. And two, I think, using a high-profile former president like Obama is meant to mobilize more of the Democrat constituency who may not be really paying close attention to this redistricting fight.
Mm-hmm. And then have we seen any other movement by other states?
I'm still looking to see when votes come up. I know here the states that I think are most likely to move first here in Florida, there's already, I think we reported on a few weeks ago, the state house speakers already putting together a commission to make a new map. Indiana Republicans are still, as far as I understand, under intense pressure privately from the White House to get a new map going. Ohio still has to pass, or is required to pass, a new map by the end of this year, and that has to do with a previous court decision on their 2024 map.
Mm-hmm. Could we see? I'm not familiar with Ohio politics. I'm sure you don't live there, obviously. Could we see a Democrat walkout during this Ohio State House process like we did in Texas?
I'd have to check the numbers on the proportion for the state legislature, but if it's enough to break a quorum, I'm sure we'll see Democrats repeat that same strategy in other states and other red states if they have enough seats to actually do that.
Mm-hmm. So this potentially we could see in multiple states.
Correct.
This breaking of a quorum. Okay. All right. Anything else to add?
No.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. And let's move on. Hey, by the way, let me just real quick here. There's earlier this year when this stuff was popping off in LA, the riots and the National Guard and Marine Corps deployments and all that stuff, a lot of people said, this is it. This is the beginning of the insurgency. It's going to pop off. It's going to be a long summer. It's going to, okay. And, I pushed back against that pretty heavily. I said, look, this is way, way too early. And there's just so much breathless coverage about, oh my God, this armed insurgency is about to kick off and it's about to be it. Guys, listen, we're nowhere close to that. I will tell you when things are about to get serious, when things are going to escalate, just like I was doing over a year ago. I said, guys, there's not going to be any election rioting if Trump wins. There's not going to be any inauguration day rioting if Trump wins. And there's a small handful, like in Seattle, there's a black bloc demonstration, which was quickly smothered by Seattle police. But other than that, that's it. Just extremely low level responses that failed. We're not close. I will tell you when we're close. All right. I just want to put that out there. Everyone, take a deep breath. All right. With that, let's go ahead and move on here and talk about. And I listen. I only say that because I see some of these comments in the chat talking about maybe how close we are to mass political violence, and we're not close. But I'll let you know when we are. With that, was this in the New York Times, this thing about the death cycle of the Democratic Party? And they started looking at data. It looks pretty bad for Democrats here, Robert.
Correct. This was published in the New York Times, and that quote actually comes from the Decision Desk HQ director, Michael Pruser. And he said, quote, "I don't want to say the death cycle of the Democratic Party, but there seems to be no end to this." And what he's talking about is that this party registration data is trending badly for the Democrats, in his words, month over month. And this is data coming from a nonpartisan election data firm called L2. And according to their data, the Democratic Party lost 2.1 million registered voters between 2020 and 2024. And at the same time, the Republican Party gained 2.4 million registered voters nationwide. And according to the same data set, Democrats had an 11% advantage in party registration over Republicans in 2020, and that has declined to only 6% as of last year. And they said that looking at the data, more new voters for first-time registered voters are now registering for Republican over the Republican Party over the Democratic Party for the first time since 2018. They're looking through this. There is one, I think, major confounding variable that they do point out is that in 20 states in the U.S. do not require or do not allow a partisan registration when people register to vote, which means that the gap between Democrat and Republican registered voters may actually be smaller than this data shows, or even give Republicans a slight edge. And that's because some of the larger red states like Texas do not have partisan voter registration. I remember seeing maybe a month ago one of the a Democratic leaning political analyst coming out talking about how the blue wave that everyone's expecting next year in the midterm may not become a blue wave. He said it would be potentially a blue trickle. I think this data supports that potentiality that we might not see a blue wave in 2026. And this is despite the historical opposition party advantage in the first 2 years of a president's midterm. Like, for example, the Republican Party has the White House in the first midterm election of that term. Usually the Democratic Party has an advantage in flipping the House or Senate. And I think if the Democrats fail to flip the House or Senate next year, we would likely see the far left and progressive factions in the Democratic coalition get a significant boost from this, because they have been saying since 2024 that moderate Democrats are out of step with the Democratic voter base.
Mm-hmm. We have heard a lot of that. So just looking at the map here, it looks like on the whole, Republicans are doing much better with voter registration. Democrats are faring somewhat worse, and looks like far worse in a handful of states here. One thing I see is, I think it's important to learn, or to keep in mind. I do think the Democrat Party has major problems. I'm not sure how much that is going to actually affect the midterms, because midterms come down to individual races, and you're not necessarily voting for a party, you're voting for a person. And I don't know, what do you think of that?
Well, part of elections is also depressed, voter turnout. One of the things that can happen with a party who has low support among their own voter base is what's called depressed turnout. So basically, people who would otherwise vote Democrat reliably just don't show up to the polls. Normally, in the last couple of cycles, that usually would be Republicans. Republican voters would have a higher midterm turnout, and that is flipped in the last few election cycles, where Democrats actually turn out more at the midterms. But if we do see a depressed voter turnout, that could dampen any kind of gains that the Democrats would make in this midterm. And depending on how this gerrymandering fight shakes out, that may even be exacerbated by Republicans having a major seat, systemic seat advantage. And so these other two charts are data that was recently published by Gallup. In looking at the one on the left, that is actually voter sentiment towards their own party, and the Democratic voter sentiment for the Democratic Party has dropped significantly since last year, which I think is a data point in favor of potentially depressed Democrat turnout in the midterm. And the second is actually independent. On the right is actually independent sentiment toward the parties, and Democrat and Republican Party sentiment among independent voters is basically neck and neck, with a slight advantage to Republicans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that stuff's very interesting. Long way to go before the midterms, but if this trend line continues, this does look very dangerous for Democrats. And by the way, let's not forget also, this mid-decade redistricting potentially could actually affect the balance of power in the House, could enable House Republicans to keep the majority. If that happens, 2027 is going to be a big year for escalation as these left-wing protest groups make some hay. All right, thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on here. We're at the end of our briefing. By the way, listen, if you have not yet signed up for Ford Observer, head over to fordobserver.com/trial. Check it out. It's free 7-day trial. We've got our kind of initial operating capacity dashboard up here. We're going to be adding a lot more widgets and a lot more open source intelligence tools for everyone, to give you an actual watch floor of situations going on at home and around the world. We're talking news feeds, AI enabled, of course. And then, so you not only get the open source intelligence package, but you also get to talk with other members, share more local information, and then you also get our analysis and reporting as well. FordObserver.com/trial. And thanks for putting those links there in the chat. With that, I think we do have some questions. Jared, let's go ahead and start with Ford Observer members.
All right. This one's actually kind of an opinion question. Ben wants to know, he praises Tulsi's Tulsi's removing the old guard from the ODNI. Has there been a more effective cabinet level person in the Trump administration than Tulsi?
I don't know, Robert. I think I've seen some good things come out of the Department of Energy, like trying to turn around and cancel out all the Clean Power Plan 2.0 stuff that was heading us straight towards an energy cliff. We're not out of the woods yet on that, but I've seen a lot of good stuff there. What have you seen?
Yeah, I think Chris Wright and Lee Zeldin, so Department of Energy and EPA, have been very effective, especially in using the Federal Power Act to run triage effectively on U.S. grids for right now. But from what I can see that they've been doing since January is hopefully positioning us in the medium and long term for getting out of a potential power shortage. The other one that comes to mind is Scott Bessent. I think he's been pretty, if based on what I've read of both what he and Stephen Mirren have written and what they've said about this economic statecraft that the Trump administration is engaging in, they've been pretty effective based on the getting a lot of these trade deals done based on the objectives they outlined in some of these papers, like Stephen Mirren's paper from December.
Mm-hmm. All right. Good answer. Thanks for that, Robert.
All
Next question, Jared.
Yep. From Bad Webbit, what is your assessment of Bondi's memo to the states regarding their compliance with federal immigration law? I.e., do you think they will comply, be arrested, etc.? Yeah,
this is definitely a Robert question. So this is something that came out yesterday. Stephen Miller joined a chorus of Trump administration officials warning, wagging his finger at them, saying, you better start cooperating with us. We're going to take you to court. Criminal action he's talking about. I don't know, Robert, are we going to see any changes?
Well, like I said yesterday, there was already one that was very shortly after they published this list and the veiled legal threat from the Department of Homeland Security and the DOJ. I do think they will at least be partially effective. Some of the bigger blue states, Democrat-controlled states that could probably fight these lawsuits or criminal charges more effectively, like New York and California, I don't think will comply. But some of the smaller states and more importantly, probably the sanctuary jurisdictions, even within red states. So within some of the Republican controlled states, there are, large cities and metro areas that have these sanctuary policies where they either do not at all cooperate with ICE when it comes to detaining illegal immigrants who've been arrested, or they have shortened that 48-hour detainer period to a handful of hours. And that has actually taken, I think, like you said yesterday, quite a few resources from ICE that they would otherwise not have to expend because they have to send more agents for these detainers rather than just a couple of agents and have on the ground support. So I think it will be much more effective with these these sanctuary state jurisdictions within red states and possibly even some of the smaller blue states. California, Washington State, New York, probably less effective.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that. There's a question for Jared here. Jared, this memorandum of understanding between the U.S. and Taiwan, these embassies, which is maybe technically not supposed to happen. Historically, China has responded to that kind of stuff with large-scale military exercises around Taiwan, incursions into their exclusive economic zone, et cetera, basically just intimidation and harassment. Effectively, what can even China do about this?
Well, so when it comes to any kind of unofficial diplomacy, normally China just kind of floats and sputters, or they send us. They don't do a whole lot. It's the diplomatic visits that tend to get a lot of attention, and they will react in meat space, actually sending ships, conducting exercises, stuff like that. So I expect for this memorandum of understanding, it's going to again be just the Ministry of Foreign Affairs mouthing off, but keep in mind that this is all pushing toward a goal that China has stated as a red line. That it's building towards something much bigger, even though the immediate reaction may not be big at all.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this: being that we are trying to wind down Russia, Ukraine, Trump is trying to wind down Russia, Ukraine, and you said we've been kind of looking at repositioning assets or actively repositioning assets out of the European and Central Command theater, so Europe and the Middle East, sending some to South America. We've got some ships down around Venezuela. It looks like maybe regime change is one potential course of action there. And then trying to send the rest here to the Indo-Pacific. If Ukraine and Russia do successfully sign a peace agreement, do you think this is a situation where the Trump administration could escalate things with China by encouraging Taiwan to actually declare independence?
No. That's we covered it. Oh, you know what? It would have been about 2 months ago. Now that I think about it. Yeah, we covered that there were war games where that was reserved as a response to Chinese aggression. So basically, the idea is you have all of the architecture in place to do so, not just U.S. to Taiwan, but Japan, Philippines, most of Europe that we're allied with, all of them simultaneously recognize it as a reaction to Chinese aggression.
So it would not be
far more
a first strike. Yeah, so it wouldn't be a first strike. It would be a response.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for that. It's been said that Dan Bongino and Kash Patel are struggling in FBI because they do not have long-standing relationships or cultural connection. Is this a legitimacy problem? Yeah, I guess you could probably say it's a legitimacy problem for their leadership being in positions of power there. Lack of influence, probably with the rank and file, I would imagine, is one of their big challenges. By the way, Robert, did you see that Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, revoked the clearances, effectively firing, I think it's 19 intelligence officers or analysts, whoever they were at in various positions. And one of the things she said is that they're not going to be, basically, I forget exactly what the memo said, but it was something to the effect that if you don't do your job, or if you try to buck the system or sabotage or undermine, what we're trying to do, like basically you're out of here. And it's a trust issue. I imagine that these 19 individuals, and I don't know this for sure, but I imagine that the 19 individuals had some level of association with the quote unquote anti-Trump resistance. There's this big kind of inside outside strategy, and the inside part of that strategy is the federal workforce, members of the federal workforce and Congress work against the Trump administration from the inside. And did you see exactly what happened there and why that was? Because this relates to the Kash Patel and Bongino problem.
I did see the memo, and the only response I've seen so far was actually from, I think, a senior CIA official saying that basically they are back in the social media sphere because they've had their clearance removed and it was over partisan issues. But I am sure. I am confident that they were probably involved with some of these in this inside outside strategy. And because there is a strong partisan support for the Democratic Party within the federal government in general, just based on the partisan political donation data that has been gathered based on employment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's, this seems like removing a potential, what was the guy's name? The Ukrainian guy that leaked the
Alexander Vindman.
Yeah, Vindman. Yeah, this seems like maybe avoiding a Vindman problem in the future for the administration.
Well, I think so. As part of this announcement of the slashing the ODNI, I think Tulsi Gabbard brought up that she had actually fired 2 ODNI officials earlier this year over exactly the same thing that Vindman did, these leaks. I think in the case of the ODNI, they had leaked some unclassified assessments that Gabbard had characterized as meant to undermine the Trump administration. If I remember right, that might have even been around the Iran nuclear facility bombing when they had leaked the assessments or the bomb damage assessments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like that is the case. I can see, if you're on the other side, I can see the argument that they're removing career service officials. By the way, let me just say this. In terms of being a good intelligence analyst, it's impossible to replace the years or decades of experience you have tackling a single country or a single region. And it's not just base of knowledge. It's the relationships with the people that you have in that country or in that region that you can call on, the former officials, and say, hey, what's going on? What's this perspective? That is absolutely irreplaceable. But you cannot have these career service officers, intelligence analysts, or collectors, or whoever these people were. You cannot have them undermining that policy. So as long as it's legal and accurate, and it sure seems like that's probably what these 19 people were up to. So no surprise there. Any other comments on this, Robert?
No.
Okay. All right. Jared, any other questions here from over on the high side from our Fort Observer members?
Yes.
Here, let me.
Sorry.
So yes, our current app will be phased out, but we are introducing a new app. See, part of the problem is the system the platform we were previously on just had all sorts of limitations. We wanted to introduce new code and set up some of these new OSINT open source intelligence tools. And that platform just would not allow us to do the things that we wanted to do. So it became quite apparent since hiring Rob, who's our new chief technical and product officer, since hiring him, it just became apparent we can't continue on with the current platform. So that is going to be phased out. We do have a new website. We'll be introducing a new app with the bells and whistles that we want. And we made this decision partially because next year is going to be a lot more difficult. And when we get into 27 and 28, you are going to need real-time alerts. You're going to need real-time situational awareness on some of these things that are going on. So that's what we're focused on. That's where we're building what we're building. And that's why we have to go through this process. So I appreciate everyone's patience on this. Just know it's, to infinity and beyond. We're getting better from here. And then again, I appreciate your patience here. Regarding our food chain and security, is there some map somewhere that has the food processors on it? Actually, yes. Robert, I'm pretty sure the USDA has one of those. Let's try to track that down. All right. And then last question here. Russian hackers breached computer systems at manufacturing plants, power grids, water treatment facilities, and other critical infrastructure in the United States, according to the FBI. Do you think the Russians did this? Or maybe is it to bolster an anti-Russian narrative, or isn't it just an extension of China? Robert, one thing that we do know about China, these Chinese hacking groups, is they do identify the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures of other nation-state hacking groups, and they mimic them. And that is some level of plausible deniability because they use Russian TTPs, and the Chinese can say, oh, that's Russia, it's not us, even though it was. Also, this is oddly timed. All this new thing about, Russia hacked into all these systems is oddly timed with this ceasefire plan. Do you think this is actually happening? Is this some kind of broader strategic messaging trying to ramp up leverage against Russia? What exactly is this, do you think?
Well, I think this goes back to something we've said multiple times, that attribution is very difficult. So that's why they use these TTPs to identify specific threat groups. And a lot of the attribution, like the Typhoon groups, the Salt Flax and Volt Typhoon groups, are not necessarily confirmed to be Chinese state actors. That's what the analysis is of, their IP addresses and where the activity originates from sometimes, and then what they're targeting. There's a possibility this actually is Russian linked hackers. It's also a possibility, and even a strong possibility, that it's actually Chinese linked hackers, not just state linked, but I think, as you pointed out before, they basically have a competitive model now where they allow semi-private entities within China and even outside of China to effectively act as contractors for cyber attacks. There is a possibility that it is actually China trying to obfuscate the origin of these attacks by using these Russian TTPs. I think that's probably a little bit more likely than Russia doing it, only because of this peace deal. And Russia, I would imagine, does not want to undermine any kind of peace deal that would have the Trump administration in their favor, trying to get, for example, a land swap for the Donbass and Crimea.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that. Jared, any other questions here?
Yes, there were. Oh, no, just at the Russian hacker one. We are, if you want, we can go over to the YouTube questions. There was one.
All right. Yeah. Is it a good question?
It's an interesting question.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right.
Oh, do you think the 17th Amendment is exacerbating the current gerrymandering situation? It's definitely a Robert question.
No. So the 17th Amendment was passed in 1913. That's the one that basically sets how Senate elections work. So up until the early 20th century, senators were actually selected by the state legislatures and just sent to Washington, D.C. rather than a statewide vote. I don't see how that would impact gerrymandering because Senate seats are basically at large in states. They're not confined to a specific district. They are statewide elections. And gerrymandering has existed since, I think, as we pointed out, almost the beginning of the United States.
Mm-hmm. All right. Fair enough. Yeah, 1913 was a bad year for America. The creature from Jekyll Island. All right. Everyone, that's going to do it. Thanks so much for spending part of your morning with us. We definitely appreciate you being here. ForwardObserver.com. Start a free 7-day trial. Actually, if you go to ForwardObserver.com/trial, you can do that. And there's also 2 ways to join now. We have our early warning intelligence service, and then we also have special projects, which is the intelligence training platform. And we do that because we can cover the national and global events. What I can't do is cover local events for you. So what we want to do is cover what we can at the national and global level, and then train you up to gather information and produce intelligence and assessment for your local area. It's called Special Projects, and you can join at ForwardObserver.com. With that, we will be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.